Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome and thank you for joining in for this webinar about rain gardens. My name is Samantha Tappenbeck. I am the Conservation Programs Manager for the Flathead Conservation District. And before we dive into rain gardens, I just want to take a little time, go over a few things and do some introductions. So a few housekeeping items. This is a Zoom meeting, and so if you're new to it, I just wanted to cover a few basics. If you're having any connectivity issues, try turning off your video. That seems to improve the connection speed. Please do keep yourself muted at all times unless you're speaking and asking a question. This is really helpful to prevent background noise. And if it becomes an issue, I can mute everyone on my end, but just be aware of when you're muted and unmuted. If you look in the top right corner, there's something called speaker view, and you can choose to toggle between speaker view or gallery view. But for this sort of thing, it's most helpful to stay in speaker view. So I recommend turning that on. And then you should be able to see the biggest picture is the person who's speaking. So as we go through the presentation, we may mention some resources or some websites along the way, and we'll post those in the comments box. So if you look down along the bottom part of your screen, you can see a little chat icon. You can press that, and you can see any comments that are coming in from us or from the group. So this webinar is being recorded, and so the recording with video and any additional resources that we mention or that we provide during the presentation will be available on our website within a few days. So be on the lookout for that if you're interested. And so I'd like to jump into some introductions. So this webinar is being co-hosted by the Flathead Conservation District and by the City of Kalispell Public Works Department. And so we have a few people on the line tonight for this presentation. I already introduced myself. I'm Samantha Tappenbeck. I'm with Flathead Conservation District. We also have Michaela Richardson on the line, and she is the Big Sky Watershed Corps member for the Flathead Conservation District. She'll be one of the presenters this evening. And then we also have Haley Graff. She is the resource conservationist for the Flathead Conservation District. You can see their smiling faces waving in their photos. And we also have from the City of Kalispell, Emily Henry. She is the Big Sky Watershed Corps member for City of Kalispell, and she will also be one of the presenters this evening. And then we also have Casey Lewis on the line. She is the environmental specialist with the City of Kalispell Public Works. She is on the line as well. And so for the webinar this evening, we are going to have two presenters, as I mentioned, and Emily and Michaela will give a presentation that's going to last about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. And after that, we plan to have an open discussion and a question and answer period. So if you do have a question during the presentation, please type it into the chat window, send in a comment, and we'll be monitoring that. And then Zoom also has a hand raising feature. So that can be a useful tool if you would like to actually voice your question or comment. So in order to access that, if you hover over the bottom of the screen, you can click on participants, and then you'll see a window that pops up with all the participants on the call. And you should see a little icon that says raise hand. So you can press that, and I'll be able to see that you're interested in asking a question or sending in a comment, and I will be able to unmute you or ask you to unmute so you can ask your question. Hopefully that all makes sense. Feel free to type in any questions or comments as we go along. At the end of the webinar, we'd like to ask you to take a little time and fill out a survey, and we're going to provide the link to that survey in the chat window at the end of the presentation. And really do encourage you to fill that out. Not only does that help us get some feedback from you on how we can improve these sorts of events in the future, but also this program, along with a number of our other programs, is funded by a grant. And so it's great to be able to report and track what participants learn as we do outreach for this program. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Emily Henry from City of Kalispell. Take it away, Emily.
All right, let me share my screen with you guys really quickly. All right, can you all see that? Awesome, and you can hear me okay too? Good, okay, great. So thank you so much, Samantha, for that introduction. I'm just going to give you a quick idea of what you can expect from this presentation before we dive too deep in. So as Sam said, my name is Emily Henry. I'm with the City of Kalispell, and I will be doing this presentation with Michaela Richardson from the Flathead Conservation District. So I will be tackling the first half of the presentation, where I will introduce the concept of rain gardens, what they are, before getting into really how they work and why we need them, particularly within a local context. So why do we especially need rain gardens right here in the Flathead Valley of Montana? And then I will pass it over to Michaela, who will talk a little bit more about how you actually build a rain garden, the steps you have to take to actually create one. And she will also introduce some of the amazing resources that the Flathead Rain Garden Initiative has available to homeowners to help them along that way. And without any further ado, just go ahead and jump in. So just going to start off with the very fundamental question of what in the world are rain gardens anyways? I've talked to many people here, and a lot of them have never heard of such a thing. And I hadn't even heard of them until January when I started this position. So if you're sitting here thinking, gosh, I have no idea, you're definitely not alone. And I won't leave you in suspense any longer. So rain gardens are essentially just these bowl-shaped features in a landscape, any kind of depression in a landscape that is used to collect and filter stormwater. And so we'll get into the specifics of what some of those words mean in that definition a little bit later on. But I wanted to give you a picture up front of what we mean when we talk about rain gardens. And so really they are just holes in the ground that are filled with native plants, with rocks if you so choose, that are meant to collect and filter out water, particularly stormwater, which is one of those words that we'll spend some time talking about. But as I continue on in this presentation, I just want to encourage you to keep this image of rain gardens in your mind as we go along. I think it'll help guide you a little bit. And so as I said, stormwater is a term we definitely need to spend some time talking about in order to better understand the purpose of rain gardens. And so when we have rain falling on a landscape, this can be in the form of rain, as it says here. It could be snow, sleet, hail, any kind of precipitation. It essentially has two options of where it can go. So if that water falls on a soft surface, this soft surface could be a forest floor, it could be the garden in your backyard, that water can soak into the ground and become groundwater. And so that is essentially option number one. If that rain falls on a hard surface, which could be the rooftop of a building, it could be a roadway, a driveway, it could even be soil that's been compacted by construction vehicles. That water will flow across the landscape in the form of stormwater. And so when we use the term stormwater, we just mean any water that is flowing across a landscape. And so I just want to stress the point here that these two spheres that we talk about are absolutely connected. So just because rain starts off as stormwater doesn't mean it won't become groundwater later on. And in fact, rain gardens actually play a really crucial role in fostering this connection between these two spheres. So just want to make that clear that there is the possibility for stormwater to become groundwater, which is really important, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So now we have an idea of what stormwater is. It's just water that's flowing across a landscape. The next question is, why do we even care about it? What's the point of talking about stormwater to begin with? And the answer to that question is just that the landscape that stormwater flows across is riddled with different kinds of pollutants that stormwater can pick up and transport. Now, there are many, many different types of pollutants, and they all negatively affect water bodies in a ton of different ways. I'm just going to mention 6 here, but just know that that's just the tip of the iceberg. This is in no way an exhaustive list. But one of the most important pollutants that we'll talk about are nutrients. And these nutrients are typically nitrates and phosphates. And they can come from a number of different sources, from agricultural activities, from the over-fertilizing of residential lawns. They can come from yard waste and grass clippings that have made their way into water bodies. They can also come from pet waste that's just been left out and not cleaned up properly. And so these nutrients are necessary at low levels. So there are aquatic organisms that absolutely depend on these nutrients to survive. But the problem comes when you get these accumulating in water bodies at too high of levels. And that leads to something called eutrophication. And this diagram is a bit complex, and you absolutely do not need to fully understand what's happening here. But the gist is that during eutrophication, these algae tend to bloom. So algae really likes the nutrients and they thrive, they love it. There's just these huge blooms of algae, and essentially the organisms that live deeper in the water column are no longer able to survive because of that. And so you get these things called dead zones, which are a direct result of eutrophication and one really severe consequence of nutrient accumulation in water bodies. Another group of pollutants is just oil and grease. And as you may guess, this comes from leaky cars or from spills at gas stations. And of course, these have a number of different adverse effects on our water bodies. But one important one is their impact on aquatic animals. So they can really affect aquatic birds and aquatic mammals, because when they come into contact with oil and grease, that oil and grease can really reduce the insulating ability of your bird's feathers or your mammal's fur. And those animals are then vulnerable to die by hypothermia. So they no longer can keep warm and can die because of it. So very severe consequences there too. Another pollutant is just sediment, which I think a lot of people don't realize is a pollutant, because it is naturally present in our water bodies, right? So one of the main functions of streams and rivers is to transport sediment. And so we, of course, naturally expect to see it there. And again, the problem is, as it is with most of these things, is when it accumulates in water bodies at too high of levels. And so the sediment can cloud your water column so much that your aquatic food chains can be entirely disrupted. So your animals can no longer see their prey or their predators, and food chains can really suffer because of that. And this sediment, again, can come from a number of sources, can come from construction sites or from increased erosion as a result of habitat loss, tons of different sources for this as well. We also have pesticides and herbicides, which I'm sure you all have heard about. They come from agriculture, they come from residential landscaping, a number of sources there. We also just have plain old litter, just plastic water bottles and food wrappers that people have just tossed out of their car windows and end up making their way into water bodies. And finally, we have de-icing agents or any kind of road salt that we put down in the winter, and that can get dissolved in water and travel as ions. And so, as I said, these are just a few of the many pollutants that are out there. And I guess what I want to stress here is that our stormwater has the ability to pick up and move all of these. And so these can end up in our stormwater as it travels across our landscapes and can take these with it on its journey. And so I guess the next question that we have is, what happens once our stormwater picks up these pollutants? Where do they go next? And the answer there is where we're going to bring it really close to home. So in our neighborhoods here in the Flathead Valley. So here in almost every city and town in the Flathead Basin, the stormwater and any of the pollutants that it may have picked up along the way are draining directly into our water bodies without being treated at a wastewater treatment plant. So I think a lot of people have this false notion that when our stormwater enters a storm drain, it's going to get cleaned up before it goes into our water bodies. We don't have to worry too much about what's in it. And here in the Flathead Basin, that's absolutely not the case. So sometimes in other areas of the country, that is the case, and your stormwater does get treated along with the sewage and is discharged into water bodies after it's been cleaned up. But again, that's not the case for us here. And so we have to be extra careful about what is in our stormwater. And sometimes there are other types of treatment that are used. So I was talking about treatment at wastewater treatment plants, but there are tons of other ways that stormwater can be treated, including green stormwater infrastructure, which rain gardens are a type of that. But this is not happening everywhere in our Flathead watershed. So there are a couple cities and towns who have some types of this infrastructure, but the vast majority of our stormwater here is not being treated before it goes into our water bodies. And just to give you an idea of what stormwater can look like, take a look at these samples that Casey collected just a couple of years back in Kalispell. This was collected right before it was about to discharge into a water body. And so you can see clearly how dark these samples are, that there's just trash floating in them. So you can even see the pollutants in this case, which is quite concerning. And our local water bodies are definitely showing evidence of pollution. So if you take a look at this table here, across the top, you can see the names of some of our local water bodies. We have Ashley Creek, Flathead Lake, Flathead River, Spring Creek, Stillwater River, tons of local water bodies, and they all are experiencing types of pollution. And if you look down along the side here, you'll see the different types of pollutants that each water body is experiencing. So if you look at Flathead Lake in particular, you can see that it has some mercury pollution, it has some pollution by PCBs, and it has some nitrogen and phosphorus pollution, so those nutrients that I was talking about. And our polluted stormwater is going directly into these water bodies and contributing to this pollution. I want to stress here that stormwater is not the only thing that's causing these water bodies to be polluted. There are tons of other sources, but stormwater is definitely not, it's not helping. It's definitely contributing to this pollution that we're seeing, and we have evidence of this pollution. And that brings us directly to why we need rain gardens, right? So just to recap a tiny bit, we know that stormwater contains tons of different pollutants, and they can all affect our water bodies in a ton of different ways. And most of the time, we know that here in the Flathead Basin, that stormwater is not being treated before it goes into our water bodies. And rain gardens, those bowl-shaped features, collect some of this stormwater and stop these pollutants from moving through the system and entering into our water bodies. So that's one of the main functions of rain gardens, is really to collect this stormwater and stop it from moving into our water bodies and causing more pollution. But that is by no means the only benefit of rain gardens. So some of the main functions, as I just said, was to collect stormwater. But not only does it collect it, it has to get rid of it somehow. And so it actually filters out the pollutants that the stormwater picks up. And that's why the native plants and native soils in there are really important. They're really good at doing this job at getting the pollutants out of the water. And after it filters out those pollutants, it actually allows that stormwater to infiltrate into the groundwater system. So I talked about the connection between stormwater and groundwater, and rain gardens are really good at facilitating that connection and allowing your stormwater to become groundwater. But that's definitely not all that rain gardens are good for. So there are some bonus other functions. One of which is they reduce flooding and stream erosion. So if some of your stormwater is getting captured and actually being allowed to become groundwater, that's going to reduce the magnitude of your floods, going to reduce the magnitude of erosion. They also provide habitat for birds and insects, especially pollinators, which we all know are super important for our survival and the survival of everything around us. And of course, they look lovely and are just an interesting feature, an interesting and beautiful feature that you can add to your landscaping. So clearly, rain gardens have many functions other than just the primary functions that I've been spending most of the presentation talking about. And so really, there are tons of good reasons to build them. And I just want to end really quickly my part of the presentation with a little glimmer of hope. So I talked a lot about the pollution our local water bodies are experiencing and how these pollutants are harming our water bodies, but it's all true, but it's also true that our water bodies here are some of the cleanest in the whole country. So compared to some other places in the country, these water bodies are extremely pristine. We are seeing some pollution happening, but overall, these water bodies are really clean comparatively. And as populations in the area continue to grow as the years move on, the pollution is only going to get worse. We expect it to get worse. And rain gardens are really an excellent way for you to keep our local water bodies as clean as possible. It's a small thing that everyone who owns a home can do. And they're only going to become more important in the years to come. And with that, I will pass it over to Michaela to discuss the logistics of creating a rain garden and what resources we have available to help.
Great, thanks, Emily. I'll go ahead and get my screen shared. All right, can everyone see that okay? Can everyone hear me all right? Yes, okay. All right, so thank you so much, Emily. Again, my name is Michaela Richardson, and I am the Big Sky Watershed Corps member at the Flathead Conservation District. And I will be continuing the webinar by talking a little bit more about how to design a rain garden and ultimately construct one as well. And towards the end as well, I'm going to continue to talk a little bit more about the Flathead Rain Garden Initiative and some of the resources that we provide to help make this a simple process and get rain gardens built here in Flathead County. So to get started, we are going to talk about how to design a rain garden. So unfortunately, since we've had to make the workshop virtual, I cannot provide hard copies of the do-it-yourself workbook that you see here on the screen. I have a hard copy with me here. At the end, we will, actually Samantha, I think, can upload it right now into the chat, and you are able to download it. If for any reason you can't figure that out, we will also have it available on our website as well, which I will also talk about later on in the presentation. Let's go ahead and get started with designing a rain garden.
So there are 4 main aspects that I am going to cover. The first is going to be determining a location for a rain garden, if a rain garden is even feasible on your property. We are then going to talk a little bit about assessing your soil. This is also a really important part for a rain garden because it can help ensure the success of your plants and also dictate also how the water is going to infiltrate once the water is collected. I'm also going to discuss how you determine the size and also the shape. And then we will talk a little bit about how to select the plants. So in this diagram you see here on the lower left corner, that kind of gives an overview of the main things that we will be discussing. All right, so determining location. So to start, you need to assess the current conditions of your property. So there are a few important things to look at. The first is going to be what impermeable surfaces are there. So as Emily mentioned earlier, this is going to include hard surfaces that aren't able to soak or infiltrate any water. So this could be your roofs, whether that's on your house or your garage. If you have a paved driveway, patios, sidewalks, anything like that. It's good to recognize what surfaces are going to be draining water. The next thing you want to consider is where your downspouts are located. So a lot of the time when this water is draining off, particularly your roof, it will usually get collected in a gutter and then the downspouts will release it somewhere on the ground. So it's good to recognize where those are at. And with that too, you also want to notice what direction that these surfaces are draining towards. You want to see where all that water is moving towards. And then finally, a good thing to assess is, are there any areas that are regularly wet or possibly have standing water in the spring when the snow starts to melt? And this is really important because the first thing about locating a rain garden is you want to try to place it where water naturally drains to. So the primary goal of these rain gardens is to capture the stormwater. So if you can help it out by placing it where the water is already naturally feeding to, that is a great start. And with that, it's also important to notice if you see that it's not naturally draining any one direction, you have to consider possibly capturing that rainwater and diverting it to a certain area where you want to place your rain garden. Another thing, you want to locate your rain garden where it's going to improve the landscape. So as Emily mentioned, it's not only an environmentally friendly green earth way to reduce stormwater, but it also can improve your landscape and is really aesthetically pleasing. So if you kind of have maybe a spot in your yard that you're like, wow, I need to, some beautiful plants would look beautiful there. That's maybe something to consider when determining where to locate one. It's also important to locate a rain garden where there's an overflow path for excess water. This is primarily important because you want to prevent any flooding. So if there's a heavy rainstorm event or a lot of snow melt, this way any water won't go back towards your home, but ultimately away from your home in case of flooding. The next, a few things to note too, to not locate a rain garden. You don't want to locate a rain garden within 10 feet of a foundation. And again, this will help prevent any flooding of the foundation or the basement. But this can also be dependent case by case, depending on where your water is draining towards. And if you have any questions about that, it's a great way to start a conversation with us and figure out where the best spot will be. You also don't want to locate a rain garden on steep slopes or uphill of runoff. You don't want to do it on steep slopes because the velocity of that water draining could ultimately erode the landscape feature of the rain garden. So you want to have berms on the side, and if that water is moving too fast, it might not be able to effectively capture the water. And also if it's uphill of runoff, then it's not going to be capturing all the runoff as well. And then finally, you don't want to locate a rain garden near any septic tanks, drain fields, or utilities. So it's really important to know where they are prior to any construction. Montana 811, Know Before You Dig, is a great resource to identify these as well. And it's important to note rain gardens aren't usually any deeper than a foot deep. And so sometimes you might be clear of these, but it's always good to go ahead and check while you're planning this. All right, so next you want to assess your soil. So this is really important because it can dictate how fast the water can drain from your garden. So water moves more easily through sandy soils than clay soils, and this is because sandy soils are made of a lot larger particles, while clay soils are a lot smaller. And so generally, if you have clay-based soils, it's good to note that it might take longer for your water to drain. So you want to determine what your soil type is. Where is it? Is it clay? Is it more silty? Or does it have sand or somewhere right in the middle? So there's a real easy at-home way that you can test your soil type, and that is through a mason jar soil test. So it's very simple. All you need is a 1-quart mason jar and a ruler. And what you do is once you figure out that location for the rain garden, you can collect soil from that spot about 6 to 8 inches below the surface of the chosen rain garden spot. And you're going to fill the mason jar about halfway full with soil. And it's also important to note, if you think you might want to do a larger rain garden, you might want to collect samples from multiple areas, as the soil may be differing in a large space. So once you get the soil filled in the mason jar, you will fill it up with water about 3/4 of the way full, and you will shake that, get any of the clumps of soil out of the way, and then leave it for 24 hours to the side to allow all the particles and soil to settle. Now, if you think you might have clay soil, which you can usually tell if it's that slick texture, you might want to leave it longer, closer to 48 hours. But ultimately, with time, the soil is going to be able to settle into distinct layers that can then help you identify the type of soil you have. So from what you can see on this photo, the bottom soil is sand. And again, that's because they are large particles, so they have high density, so those are going to sink. Then you have silt above it. They're a bit smaller than sand, and then clay is going to be that top layer. So once you can tell those distinct layers, you will go ahead and measure them out with the ruler. And then here in our workbook, we have a place where you can fill out everything, and then you'll also measure the total height, and that will allow you to calculate the percentages of each of your soil, different types of soil. And then from there, you use this nifty soil texture triangle, and you will do the percentage of silt, sand, and clay. And you will take each line, follow each line till they all meet, and then it will land in a region that will depict the soil type of your site. So that's an easy at-home test. There are several forms of this, but we think this is a great one that gives you a good idea of that soil profile. If you want a more thorough analysis of your soil, you can also use a soil probe. And what you do with this is you collect soil profile samples from wherever you're going to plant. You might collect 8 to 10 different samples, put it in a plastic bag, and from there you can send it to a lab and they can do a thorough analysis of it, looking at soil type, the moisture content, the amount of organic material, and some chemical characteristics as well. And depending on what you're looking for, this can range probably anywhere from $20 to $50, so it's not too expensive. And to obtain a soil probe here at the Conservation District, we have one that we are able to lend out, and we can also direct you towards different labs that you can send your sample to. And also the CHS Kalispell also has a soil probe lending program as well. And again, that's just if you kind of want to get a better take and thorough analysis of your soil. So after you determine your soil type, you are going to want to figure out what your infiltration rate is. So the infiltration rate is a measure of how quickly water will drain into the soil. And so understanding the infiltration rate can really help determine the size of the garden as well as the depth. And this is important because you want to make sure that this water that is getting collected in the rain garden will drain within 24 to 48 hours. And this will help mitigate any concerns that people might have about mosquitoes as well, because mosquitoes need at least 1 week before the larvae can hatch. And so you want to make sure you understand the infiltration rate to make sure that water is draining through the soil quickly enough. And again, I have all the steps laid out for the infiltration rate here. So what you're going to do is you dig about a 1 foot hole, 1 foot deep. You will put a ruler or a measuring tape in it, fill it up with water to at least 6 inches, and then leave it to infiltrate and set a timer. It usually takes about 12 hours. It's recommended that you do it about 3 times to take an average, but again, that's depending on how much time you have to do this. And again, I also have a place for the calculations right here in the workbook as well. And again, too, it's important to recognize the soil type and infiltration rate because if you find that your soil might be really sandy or really clay, you might need to potentially make soil amendments to make that soil better for plants that might require just a loamy, silty soil as well. All right, so next you're going to be determining the size. So when determining the size, you want to take into account some of the factors that I've already talked about, as well as some other ones which I'll go over here shortly. So the first thing is going to be the drainage area. Now the drainage area is going to be the area of impermeable surfaces that will drain into the rain garden. So basically, if you have more impermeable surfaces, there's going to be more water that is draining and you might need a larger garden. So as you can see in this diagram here, it's signified by the blue and the orange. They are recognizing where these impermeable surfaces are draining to. And in some cases, rather than building one large rain garden, if you have 2 distinct areas that water is draining off of your roof or other impermeable surfaces, you might build 2 smaller ones, which is shown in this diagram here. And also a good guide to go by too is that the entire drainage area, whatever that square feet might be, say you have a 300 foot square foot roof, make a rain garden 1/3 of that size. So if you 300 square feet, you might do a 100 square foot rain garden. That's just a good rule of thumb to go by if you want more exact numbers. Next, we want to recall what our soil type was, as well as the infiltration rate. So again, if you have more clay soils, that means that the water is going to be infiltrating slower through the ground, and you might want to consider building a larger garden. And with that too, it'll also limit having standing water for long periods of time as well. Also, when determining the size, you want to figure out what the depth of the garden will be. So in general, a depth of 6 to 12 inches is recommended. But another good rule of thumb is to match the depth to whatever your infiltration rate is. So if you have an infiltration rate of 8 inches per hour, then you might want to consider doing a depth of 8 inches. And again, this goes back into making sure it drains within that 24 to 48 hour time period as well. And also with depth, the more shallow a rain garden is, you might want more surface area because it will fill up quicker. And so with a larger surface area, that'll mean a larger garden. But it's also important to note that it might potentially overflow if you have heavier rains or snow melt. And then with a deep rain garden too, that can be smaller because it's going to be able to hold more water. So it might need less surface area as compared to a shallow rain garden. But also this is completely based on personal preference as well. Some homeowners prefer to have the standing water less obvious, so you might want to do a more shallow depth. And again, so it's kind of based on what you would like it to look like. And then the last factor in determining the size is going to probably be the most critical. It's the amount of space you have available for your garden. So ultimately, you are going to size your rain garden to fit the landscape. So sometimes you only have so much space that you can devote to the garden, or you can only dig so deep because of utilities or roots or rocks. So everything that is in your yard will really help determine what the actual size is. And again, to determine the actual, like the very specific number size, there are a lot of different calculations that you can do that are out there. If that is something you like, we can definitely help direct you to those resources. All right, so after you determine the size, you're going to want to pick the shape. So this is fairly simple. There's a few examples that I placed on here. So shape is primarily going to be determined by the features of the location. So again, that is how much space do you have available for a rain garden, or are there items that might be in the way? So if you're trying to maybe put one between your house and a fence, you might have to build a long and skinny one, versus if you have a lot more space, you can choose it more based off your personal preference. We've seen a lot of examples of these kidney shaped gardens, as well as teardrop shaped. And so ultimately, whatever your personal preference is and what will look good with your landscape. All right, so getting towards the end of how to design a rain garden, the next part is going to be selecting your plants. I think most can agree this is probably one of the most exciting parts of designing a rain garden, and also when you're constructing it. So the first thing we want to consider is our moisture preferences. So on a rain garden, you have 3 different planting zones, and they all correlate with a different moisture preference. So you want to choose plants with soil moisture preferences that correlate with each zone. So zone A is going to be the center, and that is where the water will be at. That's going to be the deepest part of the garden. So you need to have plants in there that are adapted to wet areas and can tolerate occasional standing water. As you move out, you'll get to zone B, that is represented in the green there. And these are going to be plants that like moisture, but they can also tolerate some dry conditions as well. And then you'll move once more to zone C, and that is going to be the rim of your rain garden. That is going to be probably the highest point, so it's not going to receive a lot of that water. So you want that to have plants that prefer dry conditions and also are drought tolerant. And the next, you want to choose a variety of different plants. So this is going to include different species and types of plants. So it's great to have a combination of different forbs, which are wildflowers, shrubs, grasses, and depending on your space and preference, possibly even some trees. And having all these different variety of different types of plants can really help establish a thick root system, which will be beneficial for the efficiency of being able to drain the water that gets collected. Another variety aspect that you want to look at is variable bloom times of the species. This is important primarily for our pollinators to have access to different food sources from the spring through the fall. And also it's really nice as an owner of a rain garden to have plants blooming throughout the whole growing season as well. And the last part you want to consider with selecting your plants is native plants. We highly recommend only placing native plants. They can provide so many different beneficial functions, and they are better adapted to the local climate and soils, and that allows them to establish better. And if they're able to establish better and quickly, then it limits the need for fertilizer or winter protection or overall maintenance. It is important to recognize that rain gardens are designed to be low maintenance, which is why we recommend native soils. But in general, your first year of having a rain garden, you will have to put some time and love into it by watering the plants and also pulling any weeds that might pop up. And that will just ensure to get those plants established. But hopefully after the first year, they should be well established and not be high maintenance at all. Native plants are also great too because they can more effectively filter water due to their deep root systems, and they can actually absorb 30% more water than a lawn of the same size, which is really great. And they also, again, they provide habitat and forage for our native pollinators who are adapted to our native species as well. And then too, also once your plants are in the ground, it's a great idea to place mulch around the plants. It can provide multiple benefits, such as retaining water, replenishing the organic material in the soil, preventing erosion, and also discouraging weeds as well. And also it can make it look aesthetically nice as well. You can see the picture in the lower left corner. That is our Zone A here in one of our rain gardens at the Flathead Conservation District Demonstration Garden. And so we have thick-headed sedge in there and Rocky Mountain iris. So those are just a few examples of some of our local plants that you can use for a rain garden. All right, so just want to take a look again at this cross-section view of a rain garden that Emily showed us earlier. And there's just a few more design considerations to think about. So I mentioned that overflow area where excess water can escape to prevent any flooding. So it's important to think about that when you are starting to design your garden, and also when you're starting to construct it as well. You can see in the picture in the lower left, it's really distinct where that overflow area is at. They lined it with rocks. And then also rocks are another great consideration. They can be very aesthetically pleasing. And it also helps with the infiltration of the water as well. So that is everything for designing a rain garden. So the main things to remember is you need to figure out where the best location for a rain garden is, and if you even have a space that could sufficiently capture water and infiltrate it. You need to assess your soil types, determine the shape and size, and then finally select your plants. Those are probably the four most important things, and everything else kind of comes together once you start considering those things. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Flathead Rain Garden Initiative. So this is a collaborative partnership that was built last year between the Flathead Conservation District and the City of Kalispell. And this initiative is designed to help homeowners to build rain gardens here in Flathead County. So we provide several resources to do the best we can to assist homeowners with this, because sometimes it could sound a little daunting, not knowing where to start. And so we want to provide the best direction to make it as simple for all of you who are here and interested in potentially building one or just learning more about them. So the first thing that we can provide is some technical assistance. So this is going to include things such as site visits. This is normally where we start if people are interested in building a rain garden. So if you are interested in building one, you can contact either the Flathead Conservation District, the Kalispell Public Works. We also have an interest form on our website. And we also, in the short survey later on, I have a space where you can put contact info as well if you're interested. Some more technical assistance that we can provide is actually helping draw out our garden designs. Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming knowing where to start and what plants can go in there. A little bit, I'll go over some of the resources that have specifically help with this as well. But Emily and I both have been helping other homeowners go ahead and draw out designs, and we both really enjoy it. And we also reach out to the Center for Native Plants quite often to discuss, you know, oh, this person's plot is shady, like what plants would you recommend? Or based on the soil type, what plants would be most successful there as well. And also we can assist with the construction and planting of rain gardens. This can be limited by both the homeowner's capacity and also our own, but we have partaken in helping build a few this season, and it's been a lot of fun. So definitely, if we are able to, we would love to help assist with that as well. And then also, we currently have a homeowner incentive agreement that provides plant funds for rain garden plants. So this is dependent on the size of the garden, reaching a maximum of 300 square feet. And the initiative will provide a specified net worth of plants depending on the size. And all the plants are purchased here in Kalispell at the Center for Native Plants. And with that, to kind of move forward with that, we ask that homeowners have a design. We want to see a site visit, see where it's going to be located. And then we kind of can get moving with that agreement as well. And in return, as part of the agreement, we ask for the homeowner to place a small yard sign, which you can see in the lower left-hand corner there. We ask you to show that in the rain garden just as an outreach, and also for if you have folks over and they're like, wow, it's a beautiful garden, and they can learn a little bit more about it as well. And also part of the agreement, we love to take photos and post them on different social media platforms. So we ask permission for that as well. And also we wanted to be able to do site visits after the rain garden's been built to assess the success of the garden. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our website now, where most of these resources that I briefly mentioned are found. So I'm going to have Samantha go ahead and copy and paste that link into the chat box. So this is a great resource place to start if you are interested in building a rain garden or are just curious about want more information about them. So to start, the website has basic information on rain gardens that we covered today, and it's all accessible there. Also, we'll be posting this presentation there as well if you want to refer back to anything. We also provide several resources that are available to download. So we have created several different resources, such as the do-it-yourself workbook that I showed earlier, and that I have here. This is a great place to start as well. We also have a rain garden plant list. And so this list was created in collaboration with the Center for Native Plants that has plant information, as well as such as the zone that they belong in, the name of the plant, soil preference, mature size, bloom time, and also light preference as well. And then all the plants that are listed on here are what we will provide funding through our homeowner incentive agreement. Another resource we have are a few canned designs that we have developed. And so these are kind of meant for people who want a little more direction, maybe want to get a better idea of how a rain garden can look, and including full of plants as well. We have 3, so this is just one of them that we have. We have 2 that we've kind of designed, one for sandy soils and one meant more for clayey soils. And this is a great resource to start if you see a design you like, but maybe want to switch a plant out. That's kind of what they're intended for. We want to make it your rain garden. We also have a map that is live, and it has a place to put your information if you have a rain garden, whether that's built through the program or you maybe have already developed one. This map also includes rain gardens that are around the county that we've identified at different businesses as well. And so it's fun to go in and take a look at different rain gardens that have already been built, and also a way that you can show that you've built one too, if that is what you're interested in. And then also we have a few testimonials on our website as well from a few of the participants from this year. So again, this is a fairly new program. So this is the first year that we have gotten the rain gardens in the ground. We started with a few workshops last year, and unfortunately we didn't get any of the ground as the workshops were cutting close to the end of the growing season. But luckily we were able to transfer that easily and contact homeowners who expressed interest. But our first testimonial is going to be Randy. So Randy was one of our first homeowners to participate in the program, and also the first homeowner to get a rain garden in the ground. He's a local educator here in Flathead Valley, and so he heard about the program through the Core Educators Initiative, and that is basically a collaboration of all the educators in Flathead County. So as soon as he heard about this opportunity, as well as the homeowner incentive agreement, he contacted Casey Lewis at the City of Kalispell, and we set up a site visit. And Randy was great to work with. Within 2 weeks of a site visit, plans were already drawn up, and the garden was constructed and planted. It was so much fun to work with him. We kind of helped every step of the way that he needed any assistance. including a lot of the digging and getting it constructed as well. And you can see some pictures that we have there. For his water, he had 2 downspouts from his roof that he decided to attach pipes to and then direct that water into the center of his rain garden. His family, they didn't want the water to be as obvious, the standing water, and so this allowed it to not be as obvious and keep that water directly to the rain garden, but kept it low so it would go right into all those roots. And again, this is a lot of fun, and we are really happy to help Randy out with this as well. Our next homeowner who shared her testimonial is Shannon. She's also located in Kalispell. Emily primarily worked with her. She attended one of the workshops last fall and was really interested in getting a rain garden built. But as I said, we were kind of at that brink of end of the growing season, and so we had to transfer it to this year, which worked out really well. Emily worked directly with her to help design the garden, as well as worked with the Center of Native Plants to get plants selected. And so this is kind of a great way to show how this workshop can kind of get people interested and learn a little bit more about rain gardens, and then move into that next step of setting up a site visit and seeing if building a rain garden is something that can be completed on your property. All right, so that is all I have for you today. I just want to say thank you and remind you how much rain gardens can help reduce non-point source pollution. And the Flathead Rain Garden Initiative is here for every step of the way. If you have any questions, we are more than happy to help. And 2, I just want to mention also the survey as well. Before we get started into the questions, I'll have Samantha go ahead and copy and paste that in there. So if you have time at all, we'd love for your feedback. But from there, we'll go ahead and get started with any questions.
Thank you so much, Emily and Michaela, for those really informative presentations. So we have not had any questions come through during the presentations. And as of now, I'm not seeing any virtual hands raised. If you do have a question, feel free to send it in the chat box. And also you can click the participants icon down on the bottom of your screen, and you should see a little icon that says raise your hand, and you can hit that to indicate if you would like to voice your comment or question to the group. So we don't have any at this time, but we did receive a comment in the chat box from Randy that he could not have done it without Michaela and Emily, and that they are hard workers and wonderful to work with, and he is so grateful for your help. So thanks again for your hard work on that, Michaela and Emily. I think he's really happy with it. So we have a question from Doc, and I am going to ask you to unmute.
All right, I think we're on, right?
You're on.
All right, I just want to thank you. I think you ladies did an amazing job. The whole program was so well put together, simple to understand, and so very, very important in today's world. So I applaud you all, and I also hope that this is going to be available to go out on Facebook and just educate people on how simple things are, and especially to understand on the pollution part. I think you did a fantastic job with that. So I honor you all that participated, everybody that was behind the scenes and in the scenes, and thank you for who you are. Mahalo.
Thank you so much for that comment. And yes, we will definitely be posting the recording of this webinar and some resources that were mentioned during the webinar to our website, and we will post on Facebook when that becomes available as well. So you should be able to connect to it and pass it along to anyone you think might be interested. So thank you again for your comment. I have a question for either Emily or Michaela. So rain gardens are intended to be capturing runoff that is potentially carrying pollution and all those different pollutants that you discussed, is there some lifetime to a rain garden? Is there a point where the load of pollutants that a rain garden is receiving becomes like toxic to the plants that are growing there? Do we know anything about that?
That's a great question. I can't say that I entirely know. I mean, plants are very durable and resilient. So I think in terms of they're able to filter out those pollutants well. And I think usually especially nutrients, they're going to be able to take those up and utilize them. So I'm not sure about any concerns in the long term. Haley or Casey might know a little bit better on that aspect, but that is a great question.
Excuse me. I'll just add that some of the science and the research is still a little bit new. We don't fully understand how the plants take up all of the pollutants and are able to break them down. But in areas of the country where people have been installing rain gardens for many years, I haven't heard any stories yet of rain gardens reaching like a lifespan where they're no longer able to function properly. So as far as we know, it's as long as they're maintained well and as long as the plants are healthy and in good condition, they'll continue to function kind of in perpetuity. Casey, do you have anything else?
Just a slightly different spin on it, but I would say residential wise, I think, you have a really good chance of those lasting for a really long time due to the type of pollutants that you would see and the quantity. Whereas if you had a similar feature to a rain garden or an infiltration basin on a commercial site, like maybe it was draining a gas station, you would have a lot greater quantity of pollutants and more toxic pollutants. So you might see a shorter lifespan for that type of application. But for the residential rain garden, I think we got a long lifespan for those.
Thanks. We have had a couple of questions come through on the chat. The first is from Haley. Is there a long-term goal to integrate an initiative into commercial sites?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can take that unless, Emily, you wanted to. Perfect. So as an initiative of the Flathead Rain Garden program, we've talked about it and kind of explore the idea of that. We decided to start on the residential aspect due to accessibility and how we could provide resources and support for those types of projects. There is within Kalispell, so I work for City of Kalispell, there are certain requirements for any new and redevelopment of commercial projects that do require water quality treatment. So one option is a rain garden-like feature for those commercial properties. And so that is a possibility to meet that requirement in Kalispell. They could be installing them on their own. So there are kind of some things happening out there and some requirements that are put on those commercial and redevelopment sites that are impacting water quality and helping improve it. It's just we haven't moved the Flathead Rain Garden initiative to that step, but it's out there. We're thinking about it and seeing where we can go with it for sure.
Thanks, Casey. So we have a related question, but on the other end of the spectrum from JM. Do you work with yards in a rural setting?
Yeah, so I can answer this one. So our program is relatively new, so we only have those 2 rain gardens from Randy and Shannon that are currently built that we've helped participate or facilitate with. But of course, rural rain gardens are absolutely a possibility, and that is something that we would be interested in helping out with, I'm sure. We just haven't had the chance yet. So definitely possible. Yeah.
Thanks, Emily. And I think I'll just add to that that, kind of something that we value in this partnership between City of Kalispell and the Flathead Conservation District is that, we both kind of focus, we have our own focus areas. So of course the City of Kalispell focuses on that area, and there's not much of a rural setting there within the city limits. But Flathead Conservation District covers all of Flathead County. And I think there are still opportunities to install rain gardens on properties that are in a rural setting because, despite not having a huge amount of paved roads or parking lots, you certainly still have impervious surfaces like driveways, sidewalks, and rooftops to consider. So we have another question from Annie, and it's a stormwater question. Is the stormwater in Kalispell collected in one place before being directed to a water body?
Do you want me to take that one, Emily?
It doesn't matter to me. Go ahead.
Okay. So in City of Kalispell, we have about 70 stormwater outfalls. So what that means is within the city, maybe you've seen some grates in the curb line or some storm drains where rainwater can flow along the curb, enter that grate into that storm drain. And once it goes into that storm drain, it's piped. And so the end of those pipes are what we call stormwater outfalls. So we have about 70 of those outfalls where our stormwater pipes end. And the majority of them discharge directly into water bodies. So in Kalispell city limits, we have the Stillwater River, Whitefish River, Ashley Creek, Spring Creek, and then we also have several sloughs that have stormwater outfalls within them. So no, it's not necessarily all going to one place. They all there's different drainage areas that have been developed as subdivisions, and different areas of the city have grown. Those areas generally drain to one spot, and they're kind of all over the place. There are some areas that don't discharge directly to water bodies. So we would consider that a closed basin. So for example, if a subdivision was developed and they decided to create a really massive rain garden in essence, but would be probably called an infiltration basin for that type of development, they could design it to all drain to this infiltration basin, and it doesn't have any outlet to a water body. So there are some areas like that within town, but the majority do drain to water bodies in different spots.
And I also just want to say that I did copy and paste a link to Kalispell's stormwater map in the chat box. So all of the information that Casey just talked about is all public. So you can take a look at your area if you want to know where the particular drainage from your house is going to, which outfall or anything like that. You can take a look at that map.
Okay, we've got another question from KJ. For yards with more than 12 degrees of slope, do I need to consider a dry bed be incorporated with the rain garden, or is a rain garden not a viable option?
I can go ahead and answer this one. So you do want to try to keep it on slopes below probably 12 or 10 degrees, but I definitely think it's something, depending on the location, that is still consider, because if you can incorporate a dry bed, you can, if you make it more meandering, you can reduce that slope. So I definitely think it's something you could consider. But again, I think it's a case-by-case thing. We would need to take a look at the site and see as well, but definitely don't completely think that it wouldn't be an option, I would say.
And I'll add that another strategy that we've seen be successful in other places is sort of a terraced rain garden where you contour to the side of the slope and maybe even have a series of smaller, long and skinny rain gardens that go down the hill with an eventual outfall at the bottom. So I think there's options, and as long as you could control the runoff enough so that we weren't causing erosion of the hillside, then it's doable. So you might, one of the considerations in constructing it might be making sure that you have plenty of those coarse woody plants with the really strong deep root systems that will help hold that soil in place when it's saturated in the spring and with snow melt, that sort of thing.
So I believe we have another question from Doc. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute.
Thank you. So I just wanted to talk just a minute about the plants. I'm a naturopathic physician, and my background, I went to MSU and got my undergrad in biology. But in the plants, there's an innate wisdom. And these plants have not lost their connection to the earth or to spirit or whatever we want to call that. And they know they grow where they need to do what they do. And so as we as scientists can kind of get out of our head and just follow the plant, it will tell us, because they're going to grow where they need to grow, such as yellow dock or some of the other plants that will actually heal the plant, heal the soil. And that innate wisdom is something that they never lose track of. We as humans sometimes do, but if we can be more like the tree and the other plants and really trust that the sun's going to come up tomorrow morning, or actually we're going to face the sun in the morning, and we're going to be okay. I think that as we bring these plants in, the more healthy every household's going to be, every community's going to be, and the plants are our teachers, and they will teach us. We just need to listen. Thanks.
Thank you for that comment. I have another question for you guys. Do you have any specific maintenance recommendations for years to come once a rain garden is installed?
Well, as I discussed briefly, ideally they should be low maintenance. Well, that's the goal. But again, probably within the first year and possibly into the second, you really need to be giving time for the plants to establish. So there will be some maintenance, as in watering, especially while it's drier and we're not getting a lot of rain. That'll be really important. As well as some weed management as well. Ideally, you'll be planting in bare ground, but weeds always seem to find a way in. But once those plants establish and start growing, hopefully on their own, they're going to be able to be aggressive and not give weeds quite as large of a chance. And so ideally, maintenance should not be too large after the first or 2 years. Again, there might be, if they get too large, you might have to potentially do trimming of some shrubs, different things like that. But overall, it should be relatively low.
In the overflow areas, do you recommend having plants there, or is that simply to just hold water?
I can take this one. So the overflow area is really kind of just to avoid flooding. So I guess it doesn't really matter. You can have plants in the overflow area, but the idea is that you are picking the location where any excess water is going to run off to. That ideally is away from your crawl space. It's away from anything that you don't want to get the water. So it's just a way to direct it in case the rain garden has too much water in it. If you did not have an overflow planned, that's when you would start to get into issues with having your lawn next to it be too soggy, or that water seeping in along your foundation line and flooding your crawl space or a basement, that sort of thing. So it doesn't really matter how you design the overflow, it just matters that you have one.
Thanks. I think we have a comment here. I've got a hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Doc. Dot, can you hear us?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I didn't turn it off. Sorry.
There you go. We hear you.
Okay, I'm done. I'm done. I'm up. Thanks.
Oh, thanks. Okay, sounds
Yeah, I don't know why it went back up, but
good. You didn't lower
I'm
your
good.
hand.
I'm good.
All right. Well, I think that's all of the questions and comments we have so far. If there are any additional burning questions, feel free to chime in or send one in the chat. In the meantime, I'm just going to go ahead and paste the link to our survey again. If you would just take a couple of minutes to fill that out, that would really help us to learn how to improve on these kinds of events and hopefully learn a little bit about what you took away from it. So thanks again to our presenters, and please stay tuned for any additional events that are going to be coming up. If you're interested in checking out our schedule of events, you can head to flatheadcd.org, and we've got a link to the workshops and classes that are scheduled for this year. So feel free to give us a call or reach out, and yeah, stay tuned for upcoming webinars and workshops. Thanks so much for joining in.